for 2025. So this is going to be our final webinar for this year, and I am the host for this webinar. My name is Joseph Kunuji, and I am currently the chair of the board of directors of ARN. And for those who are joining us for the first time, ARN is African Researchers Network, and it's a community of researchers who are interested in African-related topics. And one of the things that we do is share ideas. We meet regularly like this once a month to share ideas, to discuss issues that are related to Africa. So on that note, I would really like to thank you all for joining. And I must say some of our members are joining from various time zones. For some of us here, it's about 4 a.m. in the morning. We have members who are joining from California, members joining from the UK, from Germany.
I'll mute myself.
From Lagos, Nigeria. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Paris. So it's such a very, very beautiful community, and we have people joining us from different parts of the world. So this is African Researchers Network, and the network is registered as a community interest company in the UK. So we will say more about the association closer to the end. So at this point, I would like to introduce the moderator for today's webinar, who will then introduce our speaker. So I'd like to call on Yokinyam Dabali. The floor is yours, Yokinyam.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Clear.
good. Yeah, greetings. My name is Yokiam Dabale. I've been part of ARN for a few years now, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be introducing our guest speaker. It's now 6 a.m. here. So let me get the introduction. Okay. Again, greetings to you all. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Dr. Badat, for being here. So a brief introduction to our esteemed speaker. Saleem Badat is research professor in the Department of History in the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Free State, that is in South Africa. He holds qualifications from the University of KwaZulu-Natal and Boston University, and a PhD in sociology from the University of York. His academic career began after years of political activism in 1989 at the University of the Western Cape, where he succeeded his mentor to become the director of its education policy unit. In 1999, Saleem was appointed the first CEO of the Council on Higher Education, which advises the Minister of Higher Education and Training on higher education policy issues and is responsible for quality assurance in higher education. He works closely with Prof. Badat, Asmal, and Dr. Naledi Pandor. In 2006, he became Vice Chancellor of Rhodes University, the first Black South African to hold this position in 102 years, committed to advancing social equality, promoting academic quality, contributing to the development needs of South Africa, and ensuring institutional cultural transformation. Between 2014 and 2019, he was the first program director of international higher education and strategic projects at the Meldon Foundation in New York, directing over $1 billion in grant making to the arts and humanities at Africa and the Middle East. Okay. So he received several awards, including honorary doctorates from the University of Free State for outstanding achievements in the shaping of policies and practices of the higher education environment from the University of York and Rhodes University. He's also author of several books and several articles and book chapters. His most recent work, it includes edited collections on research and activism. Okay. And so it's a pleasure to have you, Dr. Badat. So the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes to do your presentation, and then afterwards, we're going to have a Q&A. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you. Okay, so that's a bit of a curveball because I was led to believe there's 30 minutes, so let's see how it goes. And I prepared.
Okay, it's okay, sir. It's okay. You can go 30 minutes.
Right. So, but hopefully it will be just under that. So thank you very much for the invite to present at your forum. And my presentation will engage 3 issues. First, how do we contest global North hegemony in knowledge creation? Second, how do we overcome Africa's subordinate position in global scholarship? And third, how do we advance knowledge that serves Africa's needs? Now, let's observe that unequal social relations shape who produces knowledge, in what languages knowledge is produced, whose and what knowledges are valued, privileged and subordinated, who publishes and what is published, and who has and who does not have voice. These unequal social relations also shape the knowledge orientations and agendas of universities and affect the creation and sharing of knowledge. Unequal relations in the field of knowledge in turn reproduce unequal relations in the economic and social spheres between the North and the South. And recent years have seen struggles to contest hegemonic Western thinking on and approaches to knowledge. These struggles are critical for liberating scholarship from what I call old, tired, and pernicious orthodoxies that impede knowledge making, arbitrarily value certain modes of knowledge making, and ultimately constrain thought and research. And these struggles are also critical for creating African universities, as opposed to the current mimics or replicas of universities in the colonial metropoles. So in this presentation, I'll focus on the issues of research on Africa, for Africa, with Africa, in Africa, and of Africa in relation to the arts, humanities, and social sciences. To begin with research on Africa, what is the purpose of undertaking research on Africa and issues related to Africa? And let me say this purpose is neither self-evident or not without dispute. One intention may be to advance understanding of our natural and social worlds and enrich our scientific understanding and cultural heritage by producing new thought and knowledge. Another purpose may be to grapple with contemporary and urgent problems and to seek solutions in the forms of policies and technologies. Beyond the question of purpose is that of interest. Whose interest does research on Africa serve? Whose interests are ignored? And whose interests should be served? Given the entanglement of knowledge and power, power is always present. How is the public common good to be safeguarded in the face of often narrow private interests of dominant elites, political and economic? Given competition among social groups and nation states, what should be the concern of research on Africa? What research should be prioritized? What should be the key goals of research? What strategies should be used? And how should research be resourced? Should scholarship be concerned only or largely with economic competitiveness and growth, with contemporary political and social problems, and questions of immediate relevance as usually defined by governments? Ultimately, what are African goals and priorities and questions? And of course, these are objects and outcomes of struggles between different social groups institutions, classes in society. Those priorities and goals don't just emerge from the sky. They're the product of struggles that occur in society. And now I want to turn to another question. Does research on Africa, whatever it is, wherever it is undertaken, create knowledge that is for Africa? And in a sense, this question is rhetorical because at one level we know the answer. Often it does not. Asymmetries between the global South and North, mean inequities in resources and infrastructure for research and publishing, often compromises research pertinent to African needs and goals. However, the question of research that is for Africa is not without problems too. Knowledge making for Africa is not about propaganda that masquerades as research or research that serves only elites. Advancing knowledge on Africa and for Africa means grappling with urgent problems and seeking solutions to those. But it also means testing the knowledge produced by previous generations. It means undertaking research into the most arcane and abstract issues and the most theoretical and intractable uncertainties of knowledge, and delving into issues that are not immediately relevant to others but have the great potential to yield future benefit, not just to Africans, but to humankind. And this means scholars and universities fearlessly asking questions that may not be popular, and in the spirit of truth, pursuing these questions and answers wherever they may lead. At the same time, Edward Said provides wise counsel when he says, there's always something radically incomplete, insufficient, provisional, disputable, and arguable about humanistic knowledge. We must be critical of humanism in the name of humanism, not least because our experiences of Eurocentrism and empire reveal how humanistic thought has justified all kinds of abuses. And we see that unfolding at the moment as we talk in different parts of the world, Palestine for one, Sudan for another. We must be critical of humanism in the name of humanism. Our task is to fashion a different kind of humanism that is cosmopolitan, rather than a parochial Afrocentrism or an unacceptable alternative universalizing, as an alternative to the universalizing that happens from the United States and Europe. We must approach our task, as Said counsels, as an unsettling adventure in difference, in alternative traditions, in texts that need a new deciphering within a much wider context than has been hitherto given them. Northern interest in research on Africa, linked to their ideas on internationalization, is connected, we know, with national, economic, and political interests and specific institutional interests. Harvard has interests. We have to accept that, and we have to be mindful of that, as does Princeton, as does Cambridge and Oxford. And this research and these interests occur within persistent asymmetries and practices that assume the superiority of Western modes of knowing and theorizing. And this conduct confounds equitable North-South relationships. We must insist on a different internationalization logic than the ones that we inherit or that are imposed on us from the North. Our logic has to be social solidarity, global public good, respect for difference and diversity of the kind that we do not enjoy, social inclusion rather than participating on the sidelines, reciprocity, and mutual beneficent for individuals, for scholars, countries, and institutions. We must insist on all those things. A commitment to research that is not just on Africa, because many people want to do research on Africa, but also for Africa, and advances African goals, priorities, and interests. Knowledge for Africa means forging strong networks amongst Africans, like the kind of network you have created, instead of relying on partnerships mainly with the global North. because those partnerships are often driven by funding areas of research that are more important to them than to us. Not in all cases, but often the priority is what is going to benefit the North. It also means, apart from the creation of networks like you have created, being involved in international research networks to give voice to priorities for research in African countries. And let me just touch on that. Many of us travel internationally. We participate in these research networks. And far too often, I find Africans are silent. They are fearful. They are worried about the possibilities of donor funding being ended if they are too critical. I'm afraid you cannot be subservient in those fora. You have to speak out, and you have to advance an African agenda. Otherwise, why participate in those international research networks? Research for Africa, of course, need not be conducted in Africa or by Africans alone. Commitment to African sovereignty and development is more important than location, birth, or origins. And we have many friends in Europe, the United States, and other parts of the world. They must be part of our efforts. Research that is for Africa also cannot have Africa as its only focus and object. One must theorize and analyze the foreign policy and aid regimes of the United States, of Europe, Russia, and China, the workings of the United Nations and other international bodies, the Bretton Woods institutions, and the like. We need to understand those countries and institutions if we are going to be sovereign, if we are going to forge our own path in the world. Too many North-South relationships, and I've seen this, evince the dominance of Northern institutions and dominant perspectives and beliefs and practices that relegate Southern universities to the status of junior partners, to the receivers of knowledge and the providers of talent or data. Genuine partnership means institutions and scholars from different countries working together equitably, reciprocally, and respectfully, appreciating that common effort can yield greater benefits than working separately. It means jointly identifying questions and opportunities, not the proposals coming to us from people in the North in bags and asking us to sign. It means jointly identifying questions and opportunities, and sensitively and digitally cultivating and sustaining collaborations. Collaborations in which we use our respective insights, because as Africans we have insights, where we use our African location and we use the resources that we have to exchange ideas and to authentically to achieve common goals. It's as Steve Biko said many years ago, we don't simply want visibility. We want meaningful participation in the knowledge agenda. Power relations between the North and South, Northern institutions and Southern institutions, asymmetries, unfortunate assumptions on the part of the people in the North, and ingrained historical practices that we still see around us today often make successful North-South partnership difficult, demanding, and sometimes elusive. A global economy of knowledge centered on the elite institutions in the North is a massive fact. It shapes established disciplines and new domains, and it affects training, funding, research methods, publication, prestige, and recognition. The concepts academic dependency and extraversion denote how Global South scholars are oriented to and dependent on the institutions, concepts, and techniques of the metropole, and how the intellectual labor process in the Global South is arranged to confer Global North institutions predominant authority. This authority is exercised directly, as when Global North funders define the problems for researchers in the South, or indirectly, through practices as researching within an established methodological framework or teaching curricula model on those of northern institutions in the name of providing the best, when the best is devoid of context. Global South scholars, however, you and I, are not merely hapless, passive victims of extroversion. Individuals and institutions contest and push back against unequal relations, creatively exploit opportunities, and advance the agendas of the Global South and knowledge from the Global South. My colleague Jess Auerbach at the University of Cape Town notes that contemporary research practices were integral to the process of European domination of global knowledge systems, and that the well-being of the majority of the planet is compromised by the dominance of one culture of knowledge and knowing, the supposedly superior Western or Northern culture. She advances thoughtful ideas for more equitable knowledge practices around the globe. For her, these include a decolonization of the mind, our minds to begin with, historical awareness of both dominant and contesting histories of place, space, and relationship, the decolonization of data, a diversity of lenses through which sources are interpreted, epistemological, theoretical, and methodological innovation, a decolonization of expertise, inclusive teams, a substantive diversity that is not just skin deep, and place for relationship and care and commitment in the knowledge endeavor. Beyond research on Africa and for Africa is the question of research with African scholars and universities. It means meaningfully involving African scholars who possess theoretical, methodological, and empirical insights shaped by place and space, by our location in Africa. And it also means meaningfully contributing to Southern efforts to build institutional capacities and individual research and knowledge capabilities. The fact that we lag in these regards does not have to do with our genes or with our minds. It has to do with a global order in which the North has colonized and exploited the South for centuries. Collaboration with African universities cannot be limited to research on Africa, even if it is for Africa. Globalization and neoliberalism have accentuated old economic and social problems and have triggered new problems at local, national, and global levels. If planetary changes have acute implications for Africa, they are global in nature. We know that especially around climate change. The vast and complex challenges that confront humanity must be studied collectively and from multiple perspectives that span disciplines and fields. It requires a transnational and global concept of public interest and public good. Turning to research in Africa, it is trite that arts, humanities, and social science research on Africa must occur principally in Africa and be undertaken by Africans. Yet such research is poorly funded in most African countries, and few dedicated research centers exist. Social science publishing output has been rising, but Africa's contribution to publishing remains negligible. Aside from inadequate public support for universities, the social sciences and the arts and humanities especially experience significant challenges. The harnessing of universities for economic and political advantage means that knowledge generated by the natural, medical, and business sciences and engineering is privileged everywhere. The perverse obsession with global rankings reinforces such privileging, as does the chase for research subsidy by universities in South Africa. The arts and humanities are either benignly tolerated or outrightly neglected. The late Thandika Makandawire advanced many good reasons why they should not be neglected. Our key tasks here are to cultivate and sustain institutional capacities for educating and scholarship, including support for research institutes, centers, units, and the like at our universities. To promote innovative, decolonial curricula and pedagogic initiatives, rather than just uncritically borrowing from the North. To build postgraduate programs that produce outstanding graduates, rather than sending our students all the time to the North. And to strengthen scholarly collaboration, networks, and publishing, especially within the Global South and within Africa. So it begins really with thoughtful undergraduate programs that are taught by dedicated scholars that graduate capable students. Increasingly, and I speak especially for South Africa, our universities are in danger of providing students with physical access, but not epistemological access and opportunity, and certainly not such success. And in the process, they are dangerously coming close to promoting largely private interests rather than the public good. Here, the critical agents of renewal, development, and transformation must be us as African scholars, our universities and national states, and our Pan-African institutions. You cannot wait all the time for the US foundations and European and North American institutions. You can see the problems that arrive when a Trump comes to power and how it can impact on important research that is undertaken in Africa. I want to conclude with the question of research that is not only on and for Africa, conducted by and with African scholars and institutions, and undertaken principally in Africa, but that is also of Africa. Knowledge and research that is of Africa. Colonialism and apartheid wreaked not only havoc on indigenous and Black people physically, they also impacted thinking and thought, particularly how the dominated, us, came to acquire knowledge, understand our history, comprehend our world, and define ourselves. Here, the concept of coloniality is important. It encapsulates well the Eurocentric epistemology, ontology, and ideology that underpinned and legitimized European domination and knowledge, the emergence of a colonial epistemic monoculture, and the concomitant decimation and marginalization of the knowledges, cultures, languages, and experiences of colonized people. We are meant to be people without history. Imbued with an imperialist and racist outlook, European epistemology unilaterally assumed the right to stipulate what knowledge was and how it was produced, proclaiming its scientific truths universal and valid across all of time and space, something we would never do with humility. Eurocentrism constitutes the geoculture of the modern world and powerfully shaped science and knowledge in universities everywhere. And we still see it in Africa and in South Africa. Yet, as Gurminder Bambara has said, the European claim of the universality of its ideas and its knowledge conveniently erases its own particularity. It obscures how this claim is sustained through the exercise of material power in the world and the ways in which relations of power underpin both knowledge and the possibilities of its production. Eurocentrism also impedes human understanding. In Edward Said's words, its misleadingly skewed historiography, the parochiality of its universalism, its unexamined assumptions about Western civilization, and its attempt to impose a uniform directed theory of progress, for example, modernization theory, all end up reducing rather than expanding the possibility of Catholic inclusiveness, of genuinely cosmopolitan or internationalist perspective. It impedes intellectual curiosity. Education based on Western canonical thought erases the traditions of others. It must therefore be submitted to radical humanistic critique. Edward Said noted that academic disciplines, fields, and curricula were shaped by social struggles. The historical exclusion of fields like African studies, gender studies, critical race, and post-colonial studies, the very things that are being banned, impeded in the United States by Trump, all these studies in universities demonstrates the parochialism of classical Eurocentric humanistic thought and its disregard for the historical experiences of women and disadvantaged and marginalized people. In positioning itself as the wellspring, excuse me, of universal learning of science and philosophy, Western Enlightenment thought treats the non-West primarily as a place of parochial wisdom, of antiquarian traditions, of exotic ways and means, of unprocessed data and reservoirs of raw facts, from which Euro-modernity might fashion its testable theories and transcendent truths, its axioms and its certitudes, its premises, postulates, and principles. And yet, this epistemic dependency of Africa and us as scholars and intellectuals is not an original state. It is the product of colonial subjugation and unequal relations over centuries. So what is to be done? For Walter Mignolio, political and epistemic delinking and decolonizing knowledge and decolonial knowledges is critical for imagining and building democratic, just, non-imperial and non-colonial societies. Delinking means jettisoning Eurocentrism and its assimilative and isomorphic rationalities. But it is not a turn to nativism that harks back to some pure and glorious past or anachronistic nationalism that often is on offer in Africa. Rather, it means appropriating, subsuming, redefining the emancipatory rhetoric of modernity in order to understand citizenship, democracy, economic relations, human rights, and humanity beyond the narrow definitions of European modernity. It means studying Africa from inside and generating endogenous intellectual discourses that enable Africans to speak for themselves, about themselves, in a non-hegemonic conversation with the world. A decolonial epistemic perspective requires a broader canon of thought than simply the Western canon. It must be the result of the critical dialogue between diverse critical, epistemic, ethical, and political projects towards a pluriversal as opposed to a universal world. For Ramon Grossvogel, a horizontal liberatory dialogue as opposed to a vertical Western monologue requires the decolonization of global power relations. This is true, but currently we are some distance from that. It is hard to imagine, let's be honest, it is hard to imagine our elites, our states, our universities and scholars in Africa embracing political delinking. Given this, the optimal strategy may be for scholars, universities, and Pan-African institutions and supporters in the global north to mobilize on various fronts and in different ways for ensuring global north humility about their knowledge claims and putting an end to epistemological colonization. The de-imperialization of epistemology, theory, and methodology. The decolonization of knowledge, which is mainly our task. And global South inclusion and access at all stages of research as a critical precondition of knowledge sharing and research participation. For us as African scholars, the challenge is to formulate and apply intellectual theories and categories that draw on African conditions and the concrete experiences of African historical agents. The challenge for universities that seek to become African is to build new academic and institutional cultures that genuinely respect epistemological difference and diversity and social justice in knowledge making. If Eurocentrism and Northern hegemony result in global cognitive injustice, The struggle for global social justice must also be a struggle for cognitive justice. Diversity is crucial for cognitive justice. A diversity of knowledges is an anchor for an inventive democratic imagination. The task of our scholarship, you and I, is to deconstruct the standard narratives based upon the universalization of parochial European histories, to provincialize ideas that are based on European experiences but unwarrantedly universalized globally. Our task is to reconstruct global narratives on the basis of empirical connections forged between us, Asia, South America, and elsewhere through histories of colonialism, enslavement, dispossession, and appropriation. And above all, our task is to build counter-hegemonic understandings and uses of European concepts such as human rights, the rule of law, democracy, and socialism. Undertaking this work is more than about geography or social location in Africa. It is fundamentally about thinking, researching, and writing from a decolonial epistemic location. So to close, the tasks are enormous. It requires, in Edward Said's words, intellectual performances by you and I and others on many fronts, in many places, many styles, that keep in play both the sense of opposition and the sense of engaged participation. It calls for the collective intellectual, not these single heroes and heroines, the collective intellectual, shifting collections of thinkers and actors who work on common questions and play an irreplaceable role by helping to create the condition for the collective production of realist utopias. But alongside such coordinated efforts, there's always scope, and that's the note I want to end up on. There's always scope for everyday acts of resurgence by you and I, by scholars and universities, and other actors that are committed to an equitable new global knowledge order, and together with that new global knowledge order, ultimately a new social order. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for such an insightful presentation. For those who came in late, I'm going to reiterate just briefly what Dr. Badat highlighted in his presentation. He centered, so that at the heart of his presentation is encouraging African researchers to center Africa. So we're speaking of course, post-colonial Africans here, us, to center Africa in our research, because there has been, or it's ongoing drought of African voice in African research, even research being done by Africans. Africans are not being centered. And he highlighted a couple of, he provided us with solutions. And one is solidarity. We should have solidarity with each other, creating platforms as well, such as the African Researchers Network and others that you may know. And he encouraged inclusion and diversity in the research that we do, and to not also be overly dependent on outside funding, which in many cases, that is the situation for African scholars. I'll conclude, sir, Dr. Badat, by asking you a question as before we open the floor for our colleagues to ask questions. I'm wondering, from your research, I did not hear very much from, because your call or your encouragement is for us researchers, but there's in some ways, I did not hear very much about ways in which we can sort out funding from, for example, I'm thinking what role does African nation state or African nation states play in this? Because in some cases, for example, here in the United States, funding come from, I'm not suggesting that the West should be the yardstick. That's not my suggestion, but I'm just, just putting that out there. Institutions fund research, or even take it back, actually. I could take it back to even Nigeria. Once upon a time, the Nigerian nation state invested in education. I'm speaking maybe 70s, early 80s, where it funded a lot of Nigerian students to go school overseas, and those Nigerian students returned to Nigeria, and they became the leaders of, contributed to the nation building, really. I'm a product of that. What do I mean by that? That my parents received those, we come from a small community, which rural in northern Nigeria, where, by the way, Trump is recently threatening to invade. Nonetheless, from that rural context, the opportunity that the nation state, Nigeria, provided was, helped my parents gain education, and they returned and contributed greatly to the Nigerian nation state, especially in the northern region of the country. So at any rate, what role does, does the nation state or our nation states on the African continent play in this? Thank you.
Sure. So look, fundamentally important question. At the end of the day, we can bemoan the way that Northern institutions, foundations, and so on shape our research and knowledge agendas because they wield the power through the money. But at the end of the day, we have to sort out our own backyards. And the way we sort out our own backyards is ensuring that we have people in power in our societies that actually serve the people rather than serve themselves only. And serving the people also means certain levels of education, schooling, preschool education, universities, and so on, right? It's about ensuring that rather than constantly holding out a begging bowl for support, that we actually have dignity and start to take responsibility for ourselves. Because in many ways, we are not impoverished countries. Many of our countries are very wealthy countries, but the distribution of income is highly skewed. 5–10% of the society monopolizes wealth in many of our countries, including South Africa, right? So unless our own states are going to be taken to task by us as citizens, not just as scholars, about what kind of society are they trying to build in South Africa or Nigeria or Kenya, we are going to be on a hiding to nothing all the time. And so, as scholars, we can't simply be wishing and praying everything is going to come right without taking some responsibility for making sure that we advance the public good in our societies as scholars, and that we are functioning as academic citizens, and that we are functioning as citizens of our countries. Because without that, without the nation state, the Nigerian state, the South African state, the Kenyan state, the Ethiopian state taking responsibility for investing money in knowledge, investing money in our universities, we are going to be constantly on the back foot. No one is going to respect us. Donors too. I worked for a donor for 5 years in New York. I can tell you, no one respects unless the local institution or the local state is prepared to put its own money into things that it calls its priorities. No donor is going to fund another country's priorities forever. I saw that. Overnight, the Mellon Foundation pulled out of Africa. And with that went $20 million. The South African universities that were supported have not recovered from that. Look at the impact that Trump's policies are having on health research in South Africa and elsewhere. We have brought ourselves to that situation because of our reliance on these foundations and donors. So we've got to start dealing with that issue. So our challenge as scholars and universities is not just an academic and a knowledge issue. It's also a political issue.
Thank you, sir. Colleagues, if you have questions, you can raise your hands or you could write it in the chat. There's one from Abel. He's just commenting regarding my my question to you. as relates to the funding and the political will to support those indigenous research. I have other questions, but I'd rather have my colleagues ask questions. Anyone? Okay, Dr. Joe said that he's fascinated by the thought of retiring old, tired, pernicious orthodoxies. However, would you say we have a replacement?
Right. Great question. So if we are tired of these Eurocentric orthodoxies that want to universalize, what I mean by that is people do some research in Europe and imagine that's how it works in everywhere in the world. Right? That we would never have the chutzpah, we wouldn't have the arrogance to do some research in a village in Nigeria or somewhere in South Africa and claim that our findings are universal, that they apply to the whole globe, they apply to China and Europe and so on. That's what we are subject to often, right? In many areas. Because a lot of that research is not just empirical and about data and facts, it's also normative. It also wants to tell you how you should act and how you should behave, like modernization theory in economics. It holds out the picture for you that when you grow up, you must be like New York. You must be like us in the West. Otherwise, you are traditional. You are impoverished. You must want what we want. What if we don't want what you want? What if we want a different kind of society? Because what you have, you 15% in the United States, you consume 35% of the world's resources. Imagine if we want to be like you, there'll be no resources left in the world. We'll destroy this world, right? So these are the orthodoxies, human capital theory, modernization theory, and so on, that we are constantly being fed in economics, in sociology, and so on, right? Now, all credit to the decolonial school from South America that says that's not acceptable. And so they are contesting, and the big contribution of the decolonial school from me, and which I've learned to come to appreciate because I work in a different theoretical framework, is to contest matters at the knowledge level. To say, why do you assume your epistemologies, your ways of gathering knowledge, your ways of theorizing is superior to everyone else? We're not without history. We're not without knowledge. We can think. You don't have to reduce us to carriers of tape recorders. We can theorize. And maybe we can theorize better than you sitting in Princeton and Harvard. Because we also have institutions in Africa, right? Ibadan and Free State and others and so on, right? So we have to start challenging these orthodoxies that claim that they have a superiority on how to make sense of the world, that they have a superiority, they have some kind of God-given gift to make sense of the world, and that we must depend on them for making sense of the world. We must say, no, we can make sense of the world using our own theories, paradigms, methods, and so on. So the method of storytelling can be a contribution to methodology, right? And we shouldn't be shy. We don't have to wait for someone to steal our ideas and repackage it from Harvard and send it back to us now as storytelling as a method. It's happening all the time. We must have the confidence to push back against those kinds of things, right? And to take ownership of those kinds of things. So that's what I mean. We are being subjective to frameworks, paradigms, theories, and so on that are tired and hackneyed, that get us nowhere, that make no sense. It's our job as Africans, people from the global side, to theorize now. So all my mentees in the arts and humanities that I mentor at universities in South Africa and elsewhere, our job is not only to do empirical research, it is to theorize. how the world works. To theorize is to explain things, not just describe things. Don't leave the theorizing and the explanation to people in the North, because often they're not good enough. We should be theorizing our own empirical realities because we know better, actually. We live in those locations, right? So we've got to put some of those, we've got to dig a grave and put some of those theories and paradigms in a grave, really, so that we can replace them with far more illuminating theories, paradigms that are organically out of Africa.
Yeah, thank you.
Theorizing is critical.
Yeah, Prof, part of it also, I think, so when you suggest pushing back, I suppose we also, at least this is what I'm doing in my work, my research, my area of expertise is religion, intercultural studies. Yes, one has to also be willing, when you push back, you have to be willing to fund your liberation. So you don't have, for example, I have, at least personally, I had funding in the beginning of my PhD work. And I realized after some time that the type of research I'm doing is not going to get me funding, because I'm not talking, because one of my areas of research is African women. So, and as it relates to religion. And when I realize, at least here in the United States, if you're not speaking on the pain and suffering of African women, research funding will be limited. And more so if you're speaking on rural women being liberated, because often this category of women, rural women, are often positioned as subservient to their environment. So if you want funding, you this is my observation, you ought to speak of pain and suffering. If not, good luck. So I had to, fund my liberation, so to speak, because I wanted to give a different theory. Anyway, I wanted to theorize. So do what you are recommending, essentially.
It's not easy. Let me just say it's not easy, right?
Yeah, it's not.
You don't want to come across like, a maverick here, right? So I've been a vice chancellor. I've been an advisor to the Minister of Higher Education in South Africa. I've been a scholar, and I'm back being a scholar now as a research professor, right? I worked at a US foundation for 5 years. So I've seen things from many different angles. Yes, people do pay a price. They don't get invited to conferences anymore. No one wants to publish their book, not because it's not good or they're not outstanding.
Right.
It's part of the disciplining. So the struggle around knowledge is a power struggle. It's a struggle between men and women sometimes, between North and South, and within our own countries, between elites and those who stand with the people. Right? So if we were to come together and talk about what are the priorities, we're not going to necessarily agree easily. So even if there is money provided by the nation state, they often want to channel that into particular kinds of research that's not too critical of the state, and so on. And they'll always say it must be relevant. Relevant to what and to who? Right? Who's to say what is relevant in 5 years or 10 years' time? Right? So, I think what the decolonial school really does very usefully, I think, is they're centering this idea that we need to start focusing on the question of knowledge and who controls knowledge and who controls publishing, and understand what happens at that level of global politics in those kind of areas, right? So yes, I'm afraid some people are not popular in those networks and so on. They do not get invited because they ask too many hard questions. They are not prepared to step back and be subservient. They speak their minds. But equally, let me be honest. You have seen this, I have seen this, right? How many of our fellow African brothers and sisters go to these international fora and behave in indignified ways, if I may put that? They keep quiet. The most rubbish is spoken sometimes. They keep quiet. They don't say a word because they want to be invited again. Or they want the per diems because they are paid so little at their own university. I mean, I'm sad to see those kind of things happen. But that's not how you're going to liberate yourself. I'm sorry. by simply keeping quiet in those fora and so on.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Jim has a question, but he raised his hand, so I suppose he wants to say, Dr. Jim, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, and thank you, Prof. Most interesting discussion you've engendered here. I'm thinking, well, first of all, I'm hoping I'm not getting you to recap too much because of a technical error, I missed the first 20 minutes. But my question is, what do you reflect in both in your work and your experience there in Africa would be the role of indigenous languages or language in advancing both this decolonial epistemological and pedagogical agenda you're talking about?
So for me, Jim, language is critical because most of the research, most of the writing is taking place in English or French or languages that are, let's just say, foreign to us as African scholars, right? And the death of a language is far more than a death of a language. It's a death of culture. It's a death of knowledge. It's a death of many things, right? And we know all these things, and yet we lack the courage to reclaim those languages. And what I mean by that is virtually every university on the African continent teaches in English, French, foreign languages. In South Africa, there's not a single university that teaches in Zulu or Xhosa, despite the fact that Zulu and Xhosa have more speakers than English or Afrikaans, right? Mahmoud Mamdani has raised this issue too, about the fact that there's no university in Swahili in the whole of the... Now, when you give up language, you're giving up more than language. You're giving up insights into knowledge, into oral histories and traditions and all those kinds of things, right? So here's one challenge, and then we are having to work with concepts and things that are in a language that is different from our own. And then we see how our students battle in the classroom when English is their second or third language, how they battle to master concepts and so on, how they battle to articulate themselves, even at a PhD level, I'm sad to say, right? And if they're going to make it in the world, they're going to have to publish in English or French or German and so on. So you're already on the rear guard, unfortunately, right? So, I think we are not grappling with some of these issues, which is why I say, Jim, that what we have in Africa are universities in Africa. We don't have African universities in the way that Harvard is an American university. Oxford and Cambridge are British universities. We don't have South African universities, I'm afraid. We have universities in South Africa. That's still a project that we have to take on and win. And part of that might be, hopefully one day, we will see a university starting to teach in Zulu or isiXhosa and so on. That's a generation, two-generation project. But if we don't start it now, we will never have that. And it's not easy. I'm not trying to be a maverick here. But I think these are important challenges of taking language seriously.
Yeah, thank you, sir. You know what, when you was highlighting about language, it's not just language. In a way, it captures the reality of a community, of a people. I think of Ngugi wa Thiong'o. He lived his entire life. That's what he was pushing for.
Right.
And, so Africa needs to do better. But I was also thinking, even citation. I attended a conference recently, well-attended conference, and one of the speakers, the keynote speakers, from Africa, he highlighted issues, related to the topic he was talking about. And I asked him, mind you, this is an African scholar. I asked him, have you engaged any African scholars? He said no. But at the same time, you're offering, you're making a recommendation to Africa without engaging Africans, and you're African. This goes back to what you were mentioning about earlier, engaging with African literature and African work. We have Adebayo wants to speak. And then we have another comment in the chat. Adebayo, are you there?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Badat. I'm speaking from Lagos. And first, I'm fascinated to just be here to listen to scholars speak. I'm a citizen at best, but I like to read the researches and to listen. So thank you very much, Professor, for your perspectives. I have two thoughts. The first is, and I mean, forgive me, it's just my thought. If we do not achieve at this side of the globe, if we do not achieve equitable partnership with the global north in matters such as economy, technology, other global matters, climate change, warfare, energy, financial networks, etc., will there ever be a time when we can achieve, that speedy, equitable, relationship on the knowledge creation side for the academy? I'm just thinking, is it not pari passu? Does one come before the other, or does one help the other, really? That's one of my thoughts, which I would like you to respond to. The second one is, in your submission, you talked about colonial subjugation, decolonizing knowledge. You've talked about being subservient due to funding-related sensibilities, and all that I fully agree with. But I'm just thinking, what may the African academy or the academic himself do, or ourselves do deliberately next day in the office, so that they don't by themselves, or we don't by ourselves unconsciously aid the global north in perpetuating this hegemony around knowledge making? Those are my thoughts versus questions, sir, if you may. Thank you very much. Yeah.
No, thanks, Adebayo, for those questions. So on the first point, so I don't want to be heard as saying that ultimately nothing can be done by us. We are actors. We can be active agents. I will not let anything pass if I'm at a conference or I'm invited to speak wherever in the world. If I hear people saying something that seems very problematic to me, I will not keep silent, right? I will challenge that and the basis for those kind of views and comments and so on, right? But so we are able to act and do things and so on. And we have friends in the North, in the United States, in Europe, who are in solidarity with us, who understand the need to change the relations of knowledge production, who understand that they are impoverished because of this unequal knowledge production, right? That they are deprived all kinds of knowledges and expertise and so on, right? So that's good. But ultimately, my view is probably yours, that ultimately change will only happen when the unequal relations and the dependency we have at the economic and political level is changed. And that means our countries and Africa acting differently, of no longer being subservient, of no longer being used as pawns by Europe and North America, right? So unless that changes, I'm afraid there's going to be no consolidation of any alternative decolonial project that comes from Africa. And part of that is, the importance of thinking and theorizing from Africa, from an African location. It's not about cutting ourselves off from the rest of the world, not that at all. We must be able to share knowledge and take knowledge from everywhere in the world, right? We need to be cosmopolitan, but we need to think and theorize from Africa and have the confidence in terms of doing that. So that's the first point. I agree with you. Ultimately, it requires a change in the relations of the economic and the political. The second aspect is there too, I think, there are all kinds of initiatives that we can have and so on to make progress. And we need to find it amongst ourselves. So I'm excited by this kind of knowledge network that you have, because apart from being a space where you can come together and talk about issues and so on, it's also a space through which you can innovate, can support each other. Think about how you may advance certain research agendas, certain, how you support each other in conferences, how do you support each other in publishing, and so on, There are barriers all over in these kinds of areas. I'll give you one example. It became quite clear to me in the 5 years I was in the United States at the Mellon Foundation, which is globally the biggest fund of arts and humanities. It's pulled out entirely out of Africa in its own variation of Trump's America First kind of project. That was very distressing to see because it was an international funder. So there are spaces in Europe, in North America. This is not about a boycott of, donor funding, of grants and so on. I see that often those grants as aid that is due to us because of all the stuff that had been sucked out of us over centuries. So it's not about charity. It's about what's due to us, and more than that is due to us also. So I think we have to locate our own work and how we undertake the work and so on as part of a bigger project by which we restore our dignity and by which we contribute to the world on the basis of confidence in ourselves, in our knowledge, in our history, and so on.
Yes, thank you, sir. We have two other questions from Oluremi and Dr. Khadija. Dr. Khadija, are you available to speak
Yes,
up?
I'm here. Yeah, I'm here.
Yes, so she's here, and then we'll have Oluremi after that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Badat, for your excellent talk. I'm connecting from Algiers. Hi, everyone. So, Professor, I appreciate so much your talk about theorizing on and about Africa through recentering local knowledge systems, contesting epistemicide, linguisticide, and whatever. But don't you think that we need to define what it means to be African first? And I tell you why, because it's important to understand how can we theorize about Africa beyond the color line. And me, myself, I always find myself kind of in a position of being associated with North Africa, as if North Africa and the rest of Africa are not historically associated. And this break is always there, whether in terms of publishing, in terms of conferences, academia, even what kind of subjects are taught in sub-Saharan Africa kind of are different from those which are taught in the North. We here, for example, in the North, I teach African Studies course. I teach about Africa from east to west, north and south. But I wonder whether it's the case also in sub-Saharan African countries. I met people from different parts of the African continent, and I would say, fail in engaging in a kind of talk that brings our histories together. So what shall we do? How can we define Africa before moving to try to theorize on, for, and about Africa as a project? Thank you so much, Professor.
Khadija, I think that's a very important point, So for me, who is an African is the same as the way Steve Biko put it in South Africa about who is Black. It is not about pigmentation. It is about a sense of commitment, a sense of solidarity. For me, an African is one who is committed to the people and the future of Africa, irrespective of whether he's a man or woman, or white or Black, or in the North or in the South. It's about solidarity with Africa and commitment to Africa, and about understanding certain shared histories across Africa of colonialism, of imperialism, and so on. That's where I take my identity from. The idea of serving Africa, of advancing Africa, and understanding also what has been done to Africa in the past and why that is unacceptable and has to be fought. So that's my first starting point. My second starting point, and your example gives me a nice opportunity to say, this idea of sub-Saharan Africa is one of those things people like me and others challenge in conferences, especially when it is used by people from the North. And we say to them, and you have to say to them openly, what is the story of sub-Saharan Africa? You know, what gives you the right to draw these boundaries as if the North and South are different? Isn't this the old divide and rule? Isn't this the kind of playing off of different parts of Africa against each other? Right? Isn't this part of imperialism, in a sense? The old colonial kind of thinking. What exactly separates North from South? Because as I see it, there were shared histories of British colonialism, French colonialism, European imperialism, right? Those, you know, it sounds like a little thing, Khadija, but those are the things that have to be fought for. I remember so distinctly and how proud I was when Amina Mama from Nigeria and I were at a conference in Austria once. And someone tried to lecture us about how universities are entirely European creations. And we said, excuse us. Where do you get that idea that universities start in Bologna? What about the university in Morocco? What about what existed in Timbuktu? What about what existed in India in the 5th century? Yet you come and repeat these quaint ideas of universities being entirely European creations. That's what I'm talking about, of having the courage to contest those kind of ideas because they are pernicious. These orthodoxies must be challenged wherever we are.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, the next question, actually, pardon me, I did not realize the last name. This is our president, Prof. Oluremi, that asked the question in the chat. Prof, I'm very sorry for not noticing your last name. I don't know whether you can speak to the question you have for Dr. Badat.
Thank you, Yokiam. Yes, my question really is that, well, I'm a scientist and I've worked in Europe for a large part of my career. And most of my research has been based on Western technology. However, I found that the Chinese are now leading in many areas of technology and in some of the areas in which I have worked. This is because they have developed a critical mass in these areas. For us to develop indigenous African technology, especially technology which provides technological solutions to problems which are peculiarly African, we need support from our governments because it is not likely that these or the Western countries are reluctant to fund such technology. They might regard this as primitive or whatever you might call it. And since our problem is actually in persuading our governments to fund such research, what do you think is the solution?
So I think, thank you for the question. I think it relates to the very first question that was asked, that, you know, we can bemoan the unequal relations globally between North and South, and which really impacts Africa. But we have to ask of our own governments in each of our nation states, where are they? Why do they not value knowledge and research, right? It's not like, as I said, we're all poor countries. It's about what we prioritize, about what we value, and whether we have the courage to pursue those things, right? So let me give you an example. The Minister of Higher Education that I served under as head of advisory body became the Minister of Science and Technology. And one of her lasting legacies, Naledi Pandor, is going to be how she committed herself to helping South Africa and Africa win the square kilometer array. It was so beautiful that we defeated Australia to win that for Africa, because it allows us to do pioneering research now in the areas of astronomy, astrophysics, and so on. It allowed us to develop a new generation of young people and scholars as the new astronomers and astrophysicists and so on. I was vice chancellor when that happened. I was a strong supporter of that program. Many people thought this is crazy stuff, putting billions into research capacity and capability building and so on. But for me, that was far-sightedness, because she understood what it was going to do for us. And it means that scholars from all over the world, if they want to be part of this game, they have to come to South Africa. They have to come to Southern Africa for the data and so on. So there could be many more initiatives like that, where we harness and we want that square kilometer array, because you can't take away the southern skies from us. You can take everything else away, but you can't take the southern skies away from us. You can't take the southern oceans away from us. You can't take the topography and geography of Africa away from us. So there are many areas that we could be cooperating around as African countries, right? Through the Organization of African University, through the African Research Universities Alliance. Some of this is happening around centers of excellence and so on, right? Things are starting to change. They're not like they were 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? So I think the more cooperation and collaboration there is amongst our own nation states in Africa, more co-investment and so on, the better for us and for our scientists. And those are the kind of things that will keep Africans in Africa. You can't blame people for leaving Africa. I cannot blame some people for wanting to leave South Africa and go to Harvard or MIT and Caltech, because we are not investing in certain areas. And maybe for good reasons, it's not our priorities. And, you know, a movement to a little degree of our scholars around the world globally, as long as they keep connection with us and come back and commit themselves to Africa, is not a bad thing. We are all the beneficiaries of that. You know, I was at Boston as a fellow. My PhD is from York, right? But I never forget where I'm from and where I must ultimately serve. So I think it really starts with us. I think there could be far more cooperation amongst our own countries around the production of knowledge and so on.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Badat. And again, Prof. Oluromi, speaking of indigenous knowledge, in my context, you know, you never call an elder by their first name. So I felt like I've sinned. So I'm sorry for calling you by your first name. Again, I did not realize that it was you. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. I think, you know, I'm really fascinated by the talk that Professor Badat has given, and really, I'm really appreciating the response from all the people who have participated and asked questions. I think this is a topic that is very relevant at this time, and we really need to be looking to develop indigenous knowledge, our indigenous research in Africa. And I'm hoping that the governments in Africa would come together to fund research in the same way that the European countries get together to fund research, because when you have collaboration between academics or researchers from all different countries working together, you have more of a critical mass in that. And that is what is happening in Europe. And I think this is something that we need in Africa. Obviously, all the governments will need to contribute some funding, and the more countries that are involved, obviously, the more money that will be available to fund the research, and therefore could be the beginning of starting the critical mass that we're talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We're gonna have a last question, opportunity for a last question, and then we'll wrap it up because we do not want to keep you here the whole day or the whole morning. It depends on your time. So if we have any last question, we'll wrap it up. Anyone? Let me see what's in the chat, Dr. Badat. There's a discussion happening between Dr. Khadija and Prof. Augustine on ideology and the separation between the North Africa and the rest of Africa. And also, Dr. Badat, you made a comment regarding, you highlighted Biko. You know, I assume you're making your response to Dr. Khadija has to do with Biko saying that Africa, I'm African not because I was born in Africa, but because Africa is born in me. But the thing is, we could maybe even complicate that with what you've said earlier about Africans doing research. So Africans, based off of your location of Africans, are Africans in Africa. And I think you also mentioned, you know, in the diaspora. But anybody can be African then, based off of your definition of Africa or interpretation of Biko's, you know, so isn't that complicated? Isn't that because I've seen white people, let's make it plain. I've seen people of European descent doing research, even in my institution, on Africans and being seen as experts. You see, so they could even claim to be African. And then if we're talking about resource distribution and providing space and opportunities for people of the darker hue, be it brown hue in the North Africa, on the southern, you know, sub-Saharan Africa of a darker hue, then those spaces, high possibility because of our history of colonialism, right? Those spaces will be occupied by people who are African, who call themselves Africans. So I'm making that.
For me, it
yes.
depends. It depends. You know, so the fact that you do research on Africa doesn't make you an African.
Okay.
Because you could be doing research that feeds into the most repressive and anti-human policies and things like that, right? It's about, are you committed to Africa and the cause of Africa? Are you committed to advancing an African agenda and the public good on behalf of Africans? So just the fact that you do research on Africa doesn't make you an African. But so for me, it's about a commitment. And so it includes people in Africa. It includes the people in the diaspora. And for me, it includes all those people of goodwill who show solidarity with Africa. And I've done it over the years. I mean, I know people like that, you know, at Oxford, at Cambridge, at SOAS, at many institutions around the world, people who have given their life and their hearts and their brains to supervising PhD students during the apartheid period and so on, right? So those people sometimes are more African than some of our people who are born in Africa, who have lost the plot often, to be honest. You know, when you look at the kind of work, especially those who are hired out as consultants, who basically do the work, and then we are told it's been done by an African. That could equally have been done by someone else, you know. So I'm not that generous to say everyone is an African just because you work on Africa, you know. I think there's a measure of commitment, and that's what Biko was saying, you know. Black in South Africa, Black consciousness never had to do about race and pigmentation. It had to do about commitment. Are you committed to the liberation of all South Africans? And as a white person, and white people died in the political struggle in South Africa, right? if you are committed and you give your life like Ruth first did in Eduardo Mondlane University in 1982 when she was massacred, right? Murdered, right? Biko would say, she's Black by virtue of her solidarity, her commitment, and all that. So it's not about pigmentation, I should just say that what I've been speaking about is available as a book chapter. I'm happy to share it with you and give it to you as a PDF,
Okay.
I developed these ideas much more in that book chapter.
Yeah. Or maybe we can also say honorarily, well, at least from the African American perspective, they call those white people or non-Black people who fight for Black liberation or contribute or participate as honorary Black people. So, but at any rate, we don't have any question. I don't see any other question, just a discussion going on in there because of your presentation. So,
Good. Yeah, good.
yeah. Yeah, so the book chapter that you plan to share with us is welcome. We thank you for that. And I'll hand over the platform to Dr. Joe so we can wrap things up. Thank you again, everybody, for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you
very much, Professor Saleem Badat. Shall we please just give him a round of applause virtually? It's been a massively and incredibly insightful session. I made notes, and I really look forward to receiving the book chapter so that I can really immerse myself in it and better understand your position on the subject. So thank you once again, Professor Badat. And on that note, I would also like to thank a number of people we have with us, Professor Oluremi Olatunbosu, who is the president of African Researchers Network. Thank you very much for attending. And I also particularly would like to thank the ARN team that made this webinar possible. Thank you very much for those on the technical side of things, Abel, Jacob, Augustine, and for moderating so beautifully, Yokiam. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your contribution and your commitment to ARN. So this brings us to the end of ARN's activities for this year, but please keep your eyes peeled for our announcements on 2026 on the webinars for 2026. So we will receive the posters, and the first one will most likely be in February 2026, but that will be communicated. And for those who might be interested in joining ARN, there is a link in the chat. Kindly just click on that link, and you will be told how to better commit to ARN. This is what we do. It's a hub where we share ideas, where we discuss issues that are related to Africa, and as a collective, we move forward doing this. So thank you all for attending this webinar. It means a lot to us that you're here today. So thank you everyone. And on that note, I'd like to say goodbye to you all. Before we close the session, I see that Professor Badat's chapter is already in the chat, so I want to download that. So I need not even follow up on that anymore. Thank you very much, Prof. So yeah, maybe we should just keep the session open for whoever wants to say one or two things, or and for those who want to download that chapter. Yeah. So yeah, the meeting is officially over. If you want to turn on your camera and say something, you're welcome to do so. Thank you all for joining, and hope to see you in the next ARN. Thank you, Adebayo. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Please get a copy of that chapter. That cute. So thank you all, and yeah, see you all soon.
Dr. Joe, I think it's still recording, isn't it?
I think we can stop the recording. And Jacob, please help us with that. We can stop the recording. Trying to. Yeah, great. So see you all. Thanks so much for moderating so beautifully.
Good to be here. It's so early. I wake up early anyway, but I was dragging myself here. There's always something to do, as you know. I like this. The topic was engaging, but it has so many questions.
Yeah, I also had a few questions. Maybe I should post these questions in. Yeah, maybe writing something like that, like really engaging. Like it's quite a deep one.
So how do you know Dr. Badat?
I have the good fortune of meeting him in my institution.
Oh, okay.
So I can be affiliated with my institution.
I see.
I attended he led a workshop on theorizing, and basically was encouraging us to theorize. Like, don't shy away from theorizing. Like, there are several things in Africa, several knowledge systems that have not been heard.
Mm-hmm.
Research has often just spotlight certain things and certain ways of doing things. So it was encouraging us that little thing from your village, from your culture that no one knows about, like there could be a theory lurking there. Like you need to be bold enough to theorize. So it was after that session I really felt like we all need to be engaging with this kind of conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's not resident here full time. So he comes once in a while.
I see.
I approached him and he was like, "Yeah, why not?"
But don't you think it's tough in terms of well, at least from my experience, asking African scholars in Africa, let's even use I could use anywhere. I could use Congo, Ghana, wherever. Scholars, but the area that I'm more familiar with, Nigeria, of course, since I'm Nigerian, but we have smart people who are trying to do indigenous stuff, but it doesn't always get picked up. You see, so it doesn't get picked up. In other words, picked up, be it being funded, even by Nigerians. Okay, so I can see why some of us, to use everyday language, sell out for Western theory, or even citation. I often it bothers me whenever I see African scholarship. I'll read a paper from an African scholar, and it's overwhelmingly, covered with citation from the West of Westerners talking about Africa, not Africans talking about. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't cite Westerners or non-West or Middle Easterns, whoever, but it's I think it's a problem, but part of it also I recognize is because sometimes our African scholars don't, they engage with other African scholars. So young scholars want to come up. We end up what? We end up citing outsiders because that is what gets us to some table so we can speak.
There are different factors that may be responsible. One thing is this peer review thing. Like you'd write a paper,
Mm-hmm.
But what about XYZ scholars have discussed is why you're not citing them, and it can even be the basis for which your paper is rejected. Like you are not engaging with literature on the subject. So, like for me, I don't have a problem with citing, but you should not limit yourself. Like I also reviewed a paper recently where the author was talking about something about Africa, and the knowledge, the theories, everything was from the West. And I was like, these people you're discussing, don't they have their own knowledge? Don't they have their knowledge system and all that? So for me, I think there is a need for balance. Like, you also don't want to make everything about, like, operate like you are in isolation. Africa is, like Bembe will say, that Africa is entangled. So Africa is not just Africa today, especially in post-colonial era, is entangled with elsewhere. And so it's good to first of all root yourself in the context here, and then engage what is elsewhere. Like, it's good to also show that you know what's going on globally, like the debate. But you imagine yourself in Africa and like really pushing for grounding what indigenous or what is derived from Africa. And one thing to talk about the funding issue, I think it's a strategy that I've found that really works to be resilient. Like, you're gonna write, but nobody hears it. You write the second one, you write the third one. At some point, people will start giving attention to what you do. So it's not gonna be easy. Like, I've also worked on, like, my research, my doctoral research about it was like, I received minimal funding because I was doing something that not many people were interested in.
Right.
The thing is, I've continued that close to 10 years now, and I'm beginning to see the way of life that there are people platforms to speak. People invite you to, even starting from you reviewing, like certain people who were certain certain articles will land on certain editors' desk, and the first person they think of is, I know someone who. So I think, like 10 years is even too short. Like, it's about a lifetime also of like pushing the same thing. Oftentimes, when you're resilient, there's progress. So,
yeah. Nande has a comment there. He says there's also the problem of visibility. I agree. Most African scholars are yet to leverage available resources to get the visibility. Yeah, they may be doing all this research, this innovative work. We just don't have platform to, to put them on.
But one, I really like from the previous webinar, I like what I can't remember who said it, but somebody made the point that it might not be noticeable, but there is progress. Where we are now is not where we were 10 years, or even, let's say, 50 years ago. There is progress. Gradually, you see that even the hegemony of the West is dissipating, is weakening. So we just need to continue. Like, if we take a lifetime to achieve certain things, but we just carry on and do that. So yeah. I think we can end the session now.
Okay. All right, everyone. Good being here.
Webinar. Hello, Yokiam. Hello, Joe. I mean, this was fantastic. Last webinar for the year, and we are closing with the big bang. Well done, guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Good job to all of you.
Yeah, I know it's quite early in the States, but I mean, you are also very early always. Thank you. Great work.
Yeah, good job to everyone. Pushing through. We'll get there.
So, all right. So,
all right.
I need to do another webinar. So, all the best, guys.
All right. You too. And goodbye to everybody as well. And I hope if you're new to ARN, make sure you sign up.
Yeah.
You register.
All right. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye.